Blessed love and peace in Rastafari. This is a joint for the moment. A lot of considerations over the past week, past weekend, past few days, past experiences, progressing week, days, experiences. One thing, just offer it like at the forefront at the moment, is that everyone in the democracy, everyone who is a citizen, is a slave, and this is not derogatory. It's not shade. It's facts, because everyone is submitting to the will of the collective, and thus there is subjugation within that. It's the reason why that's important to recognize, particularly for those who opt out. Everybody's a servant. Everybody's a slave to some other factor, some other phenomenon. Those who are on a spiritual path proclaim the servitude towards the Most High Elohim, or something to that effect. Everyone's a servant to something, and ultimately those who are claiming to be on the righteous path of being the most free on this earthly realm are a servant to all life. So it's not a matter of being higher or less than, but it's important to recognize that even the most big baller, boss talking people who are specifically focusing citizens of a democracy, citizens of a republic, are slaves. And the reason why that's important is because the people are not, how do I say this, are without the authority, the sanction, the capability, authorization to make decisions dolo style. All right, the words were right there just a minute ago, comparatively simple, so I'm gonna have to work on calming down somewhat, and just articulate this succinctly and plainly, compassionately. It's a matter of recognizing the people who are citizens of a republic, citizens of a democracy, are not do not have full authority over themselves. And it's beneficial to abstain from expecting such a kinfolk, such a loved one, to have full authority to make decisions for themselves, to make decisions about themselves. People are answerable to other people, and there's a hierarchy for each person within the republic. It's a political hierarchy, it's an economic hierarchy, it's a religious hierarchy, it's a comprehensive hierarchy. And so whenever a person is making a decision, even just as an individual, the person has to be very mindful of the consequences of the people who are in positions of authority, positions of influence. And it goes for everybody, from the quote unquote official top all the way to the plutocratic cult crevices, and additionally everybody is beholden to and dependent upon others. Those who are at the top actually are the most physically feeble, generally speaking, and thus further distant from interacting with the general public, and being in those positions of actually making decisions in a common kind of way. But particularly for those who are the big, bold, physical impositions, and additionally, they're beholden, they're servants, they're slaves to others. And the purpose is not a matter of demeaning or devaluing such kinfolk. It's a matter of understanding that the people are not authorized to make the decisions for themselves directly. They may have, just like a negotiator, they may have certain things that they can do, or approvals, preset approvals. But people, when being extemporaneous and inviting somebody to consider something, inviting somebody to join in something, or otherwise, people abstain from having the full authority to make that decision. Now, that being said, also, everyone who I just said is a slave. It's a struggling slave. It's a slave who is struggling to continue to exist in this realm, just as everybody is struggling and wrestling. But point is that there's a semblance of sovereignty. There's a semblance of the capacity of making an individual decision. However, as long as a person is willfully holding on to citizenship and willfully joining into that collective. The person is subjugated to the collective will, the hostilities, the blockades, and otherwise of that collective. So, for an individual to expect or to solicit or to want an individual to make a decision that is significantly distinct from that collective, it's a very dubious endeavor, and that's the purpose, to recognize that it's not the person's own personal decision in that respect. The person is part of a collective, and that person is a servant, a slave to that collective, and so it's not a done deal. It's not an absolute. It's not a fixed phenomena. People can always have that decision, that volition of making a decision, but there are consequences, and it's very difficult. So, point being is that um, to recognize and to temper one's expectation about others, um, to be further compassionate, to recognize what people are authorized to do, what people are authorized to agree to when having interactions and conversations, and additionally, and rather than thinking or even endeavoring to steal away somebody, quote unquote, to try to liberate somebody from that enslavement. It's a matter of just negotiating and talking, because there's no hiding. I mean, the nature of the enslavement is very much, um, we can say telepathic, we can say tacit. It's pervasive. So there's no hiding. I mean, the plantation is the world at this point. So, and that's what it is when we're talking about being a slave. It's very much akin to talking to a slave on a plantation and saying, "Hey, let's run away," and that's the implication. So when talking to somebody who's a citizen of a republic and a democracy, it's the same exact thing. That it's soliciting somebody to break from those chains, and incur the challenges and the dangers, the threats, the consequences of that break. And so to be and just to be mindful of that. Again, it's not a matter of, it's not derogatory. It's not a devaluation. Um, it's just a matter of recognizing what the actualities are. So the police, the government officials, the corporate leaders, the presidents of universities, all kinfolk are enslaved to the aggregate phenomena that is bigger than any one person. Um, and it's a culture of collusion um, and there's differentiation, there's differences and disagreements within it, but at the same time, it's a plantation, and it's a collective um, phenomenon. So to solicit one to withdraw from that um, is a significant thing. Now the thing is, the plantation can negotiate. The plantation can let people go. The plantation does let people go. The plantation makes treaties and bargains with people, and additionally, so there is that prospect, there is that plausibility, there is that actuality, but in terms of like talking with people one-on-one, and I'm looking at myself in terms of my loved ones, my kinfolk, and additionally who are citizens of different places, and understanding, I mean, this is understood for a while, but just to recognize that, and not to be frustrated, or and not to and to abstain from yearning or endeavoring or hoping. It's not a matter of trying to convert, but just like people, why do people like keep part of this? Because people are enslaved, and it's like serious. It's like the age of turning a citizen, 18 years old in the United States. It's like it's serious. It's like shackles. It's cognitive and physical shackles, and so it's not lightly, and it's serious in terms of breaking from that. Because in my experience of breaking from it, things are unleashed. So that's what people are facing in that prospect. So rather than expecting somebody or trying to solicit somebody to do that, it's just a matter of recognizing what that person is able to do, what that person is authorized to do at the moment of interaction. whether it's participate in a spiritual thing or have a conversation about something, but um, just to recognize what people are authorized to do at that moment, and then um, just proceed accordingly. So it is cooperating with the plantation as an outsider, um, and without the direct intentionality of leading people outside of the plantation, because each person has to make their own decision. It's what in our walk, what it is just a matter of being in a routine rhythm with the seasons, the rituals, prayer, meditation, studies, and labor. Um, so, anyways, that's the joint. Everybody who is a citizen is a slave. That's not derogatory. It's just facts. And the purpose for recognizing that is to calm our expectations, to calm our yearnings, in talking and interacting and building with other kinfolk, to be sober amidst all the hype and the gaslighting, all the activism and all the revolutionary rebel kind of talk, just to like cut through that and like clear it away, clear the cloud of dust and everything away. Just be like, look, you're a slave, plain and simple. All this rebel rousing, it's just part of the plantation. So if you're truly then let go of the citizenship and let's talk. Otherwise, like, just be a citizen, and let's be honest about how we can optimally cooperate with each other. The water is dirty. The water is polluted. The trees are being cut down. Um, there's a process of annihilation of nature going on right now. So let's talk with the system. Let's talk with the plantation about instituting methodologies for that healing, for the well-being of life itself, all beings, for the system to continue in some type of plausible, enduring way. So let's talk about that. But all the other stuff, let come on, let's be honest about that. So um, there's that. Now, when we talk about, there's so much further things, but we're going to just keep it at that. One thing I will say, within the context, within the experience of Rastafari reasoning, we share the invitation for kinfolk. And again, that's the same thing too, communication, what people are able to communicate, not just a matter of what people are inclined to communicate, but what people are able to communicate without too much scrutiny and backlash from the employers or otherwise. Again, it's a system of subordination. And that's not hate, it's just facts. And it's not devaluation or derogatoriness, it's just that this is actuality. So within the experience of Rastafari, even within the experience of Rastafari, we shared the invitation of reasoning and initiating something once a week might be somewhat ambitious. We're trying to connect with the regular routine that we are on. I are on at the moment, and so, or for years actually. So, but recognizing that initiating something from nothing or something from like generality into weekly is a significant step, particularly when people are doing it online. So, anyways, what we did invite was reasoning, a weekly reasoning. So we have yet to have takers on an official direct basis. So it's understandable. In the meanwhile, we continue on. So what another topic is, I mentioned about another Bob Marley event next year in the winter. So there's initial works for this, Elohim willing, and then that meaning that Elohim willing, the event will be convened. We do it this past year in Oberlin. By the grace of the Most High, we give thanks and praise. And so we are working on the plans, very modest, extremely modest, for a follow-up joint next year. And God willing, that will happen. One thing I was deciding about the notion of the proclamation of God willing, inshallah, B'ezrat Hashem, and further, is that we have plans, and we say what we plan to do in the future, and we qualify whatever we say for the future by saying God willing, recognizing that ultimately is beyond our power to do it. So we have to humble ourselves and humble our ambitions by recognizing that it's up to God. That's part of the purpose of inshallah B'ezrat Hashem, God willing. In doing that, it does help us to be further mindful of what we plan, about not being so quick to make promises, to be solemn and recognizing when we invoke God in whatever that we're discussing, that's okay and we're being serious about this. Now, that being said, there are occasions when people communicate things, interests for the future, and additionally, and we can say the same thing, God willing, inshallah, Bismillah Shem. And in that respect, it's not necessarily something that we actually plan to do or make happen. But we, again, it's a response of just recognizing that everything happens by the grace of the Most High. So there's that. Now, it is beneficial to speak mindfully when we invoke God in our conversations accordingly. But anyways, I'm saying that because of a recent conversation with kinfolk who communicates an interest, and in response, I share the proclamation of God willing, recognizing the very, without making a commitment of doing it again. It was a general kind of thing, like see again sometime later, and said God willing, meaning that I'm in a different place. I have little expectation of being back in the place anytime in the near future. So I'm abstaining from committing to being in that place to follow through in that want or in that solicitation or proclamation. However, there is a sharing of the mutuality of congeniality and connecting again at some point, and so it's a general God willing. Everything happens by the grace of the Most High. So, anyways, that's a side note. So I was talking about the joint with Bob Marley event, and I was talking even further on track about the reasoning. So in the Rastafari. So we continue. So here's a topic for consideration. It's available for all since this is being shared in a public realm, but particularly for kinfolk in the Rastafari experience. It's the notion about leadership, and in the documentary directed by Kevin McDonald over a decade ago on Bob Marley, there's a description of the brothers who are in the band, Family Man Carlson, and the brother's name escapes me, his brother's name, but the brethren who play the bass and the bass and the drum and the bass. That's the foundation of the rhythms within the reggae culture, the reggae music, and so those two kinfolk, Carl and Family Man. I'm messing it all. So peace and blessings to both. Rest in peace, both kinfolk. But just both being touted for being such a strong foundation for Bob Marley's music, from the days of the Wailers through the days of the I3 and further. So Family Man Carlson, I recall being featured in the documentary as well. But I also remember specifically what Ziggy Marley says about both, is that how much both contribute in a subtle, inconspicuous way to the music of Bob Marley. And for those in the know, they know, but for those who are just kind of like the popular da-da-da-da without doing shit on that, but just for those who don't pay as much attention, it's the unsung kind of like foundation that provides the vibration. So literally. So anyways, that's just recognition. It's the nature of the band, the nature of what each one brings to the table, and then what's brought from the table that's shared with others, and recognizing that. So that's on one hand. Now on another hand, there's a recent viewing of an interview with Brother Branford Marsalis. Again, this is in the jazz and the djembe series of reasoning, connecting the jazz cipher with the reggae Rasta Nyabingi cipher. So the jazz black intellect cipher with the reggae Rastafari Nyabingi cipher. So we had the one testimony from the one side on the nature of the band, and showing the example of the brethren on the bass and the drum being foundation for Bob Marley's music. Then and that being testified to by the eldest son of Bob Marley himself, Ziggy. Now, in addition to that, or in a balance to that, a yin and a yang to that, is how in a interview of recent years, maybe the past decade or so, Branford Marsalis, one of the giants with the giant steps in the jazz scene today, and for decades at this point, going on 40 serious. So anyways, one of the comments that Branford Marsalis makes is the observation from his experience. Peace and blessings, Benjamin. From his experience that for a marquee jazz musician, particularly featuring trumpet or a saxophonist, the tendency is this is, as he describes from his experience is that the marquee jazz musician tends to have role players in the band, and the role players are there for a brief period of time. And that's owing to ego and having a specific identity and culture for the music, and additionally, now it was only a brief statement, and I've only seen it once. I abstain from like studying it repeatedly to like discern the nuances and rationalization for that statement. But there is a general recognition of that kind of lead man type of thing, and the other personalities in the band being somewhat further, I won't say subdued, but further humble might be a beneficial word to recognize, but quiet, to allow for that ego of the band leader, so to speak. And we can look at, I mean, through the history. I mean, obviously, beyond the Marsalis brothers, there's, I don't know if how much Terrence Blanchard can qualify in that respect in terms of what his personality is concerning his relationship with other band members. But I mean, just from knowing the names, I mean, Miles, Coltrane, Bird, and then getting into even things like not necessarily the trumpetist or saxophonist, but the band leaders like Duke Ellington, Count Basie, and additionally. So there is that sense of the head honcho, and then others fitting in a space in that respect. So it's somewhat of a congruent description that's compared to Bob Marley and the drum and bass brethren that Ziggy Marley champions as well. That paradigm compared to the kind of lead. That's not even lead dog, because that's a whole misnomer. The lead dog is actually a female, generally speaking, in the canine species. So it's the lion. It's the lion paradigm of the one man, and then the role players, and that's a feigned lion parable metaphor, because there generally are no other males. There might be one younger brother sometimes, but usually just one male. So it's not even like role players. So we had to think about something else in that respect. But it's the feline kind of methodology of the man being the number one, and then the additional kinfolk. Now that's a little bit excessive in terms of a metaphor, but that we're applying to. So, anyways, two different methodologies for the band, and seeing what the nuances, the pluses and minuses are of each, and then like what is the ideal? What's the ideal situation, or what's the ideal methodology, and how is that? How does that vary depending upon what the circumstances are, what the needs are? We're talking about a band, 5 people, 10 people. If we're talking about traveling band and logistics and management and everything else like that. What are the characteristics that are necessary, that are beneficial for a band? And particularly when we're talking about band, particularly when we're talking about traveling, we're talking about the music, the talent, but then we're also talking about business and negotiations, the agency. And so whilst the talent may have extreme charisma on stage and bring the crowd in, there's still the necessity of dealing with the venues and distribution and marketing and all this other type of stuff, where the authority exists within an agency. And there's distinct balance of negotiation amongst the band, the aggregate of the band, the agent and the talent. And so, what are the methodologies of organizing that are conducive to that optimal circumstance for each member, for each participant? And then how does the teachings of His Majesty Haile Selassie I guide us in this methodology? And we can recognize how His Majesty interacts with his court, delegating responsibility. Unquestionably, he's the number one. So there is that paradigm. There's that, not just a metaphor, but it's that paradigm but even in that he delegates, he relies upon others, particularly when he's in exile and further. So um, there's that methodology. Um, there's also a differentiation between the band scenario where there's only 5, 10 or so people who are like in the team, like a team situation, and then a further larger paradigm of the village or even society. His Majesty Haile Selassie is responsible for the lives and the well-being of millions of people, and so that's way beyond the capacity of a band. And then similarly, there's the experience of village and otherwise. So um, the leadership and organizational methodology that's applicable to the band situation for 5 or 10 people may be very effective and very influential as 5 or 10 people to have a close-knit group. The mechanics of socializing, relationship, and further reconciling differences and attending to the individual motivations for each. It may be further accessible to attend to all of those needs and concerns when there's only 5 to 10 people. Comparing that to a society of millions, to a nobility, a feudal system of nobles that are in the many dozens, the many hundreds, and that are established beyond the authority of the individual. And so it's not just a matter of the individual calling the shots and firing or hiring people, but having to cooperate within the established system that the individual exists in as well. So anyways, we're just looking at leadership, the different methodologies, and then what the experience of leadership is today, particularly for people of African ancestry, considering and factoring the notion and the experience of sovereignty and genuine sovereignty, and how that experience, that sovereign mindset, works in a cooperative way with other sovereign minds. The nature of that sovereignty, the sovereign band, and the sovereign society. So that changes because the prospect for recourse amongst the members of the band is different when the members of the band recognize that that's the sovereignty. Like, there's no other place to go to in terms of, like, there's no lawsuits, there's no calling the police, there's no going to an outside authority for resolution within the band itself. That's part of the nature and part of the experience of the sovereign mindset and the sovereign band. So where do we get guidance regarding this? Again, there's the example of His Majesty Haile Selassie. There are the examples of the teachings from our many ancestors, prophets, and sages through the years, through the generations, and those who pick up in the trod today, and in recent generations. So again, this is part of the consideration for reasoning, part of the invitation for looking at this, particularly in the pragmatic sense of how we organize ourselves at this moment, how we strengthen and fortify our homesteads, optimize the experience of well-being, safety, comfort for the women and children, the elders, the vulnerable, and the brethren and sistren who are in our charge, in our purview, in our midst, in our circles, in our relationship, in our bonds, in our commitments, in our hearts and minds. So that's some of the consideration. Now, we can take it even further, next level amongst Rastafari brethren, and looking at the example of His Majesty Haile Selassie, and recognizing amidst the wind, that, to be honest, His Majesty is attached to the system, is attached to the imperialism, as much as that might seem blasphemous or otherwise, and it's not degrading, or how do I say this? It's not denigrating the miracles and the generosity and the compassion that His Majesty shares, but it's just recognizing the actuality. Because when we look at how we are to be, how we are to guide ourselves, and how we are to lead and be in this life, it is beneficial to recognize that as His Imperial Majesty, His Majesty Haile Selassie is connected with the imperial constructs, And for example, like His Majesty abstains from going out into the bush and living in the mountains, Dolo style, away from things. He has responsibility. That's part of his charge in this life. So as Rastafari, when we have this spiritual awakening, we glean the teachings and the example of sovereignty from His Majesty and from our ancestors, prophets, and sages. At the same time, we have to recognize, okay, we have this proclivity and this guidance to be distinct from the imperialism of today, and the imperialism that's been continuing since long time. We have guidance to be distanced from that, to be optimally unattached and independent from that. However, at the same time, we have to recognize, it's beneficial to recognize that the example of many, the example of many teachers, ancestors, prophets, sages, and His Majesty Haile Selassie I himself is limited in providing that example of being distanced from imperialism. So it's that balance again between Babylon and the bush, and receiving the guidance, the beneficial guidance, and it would be helpful to be specific to give some tangible things. But this is part of what this is an invitation for the reasoning, because there's a presumption that many people already have knowledge about, like the basic things that I'm referencing, or in very vaguely referencing. So, for the sake of brevity, I'm just further getting to the further points of consideration for those who have established knowledge already, and familiarity and studies. So that's the thing, recognizing that there's much to be gleaned and emulated within the example of His Majesty Haile Selassie I, but at the same time recognizing that the life, the liberty of Rastafari is distinct, is fundamentally, to be honest, fundamentally distinct from the liberty of an imperial majesty. So it's for us in this spiritual awakening, in this nascent, growing spiritual awakening of Rastafari. It's less than a century. Well, it's basically a century in the making. With due respect to our forebears who provide foundation in this trod. It's still very new, and it's still very much being learned, even at a foundational level. And the nature of it is one that, like with Sikhi, it's like there's the beginning, and then it continues for centuries to be able to establish itself, and not even less as a systemic institutional phenomena, but there's that proclivity of eventuality, but at the same time always recognizing that Rastafari continually turning this. Peace and blessings to you, brother.
Is this open?
It should be open at this point, I think so, yeah.
I can go in here right here?
You can ring the bell and they'll let you in. You can hit them all up. I'm uncertain which one. 1 p.m. he said.
What time is it now?
It's 10 till. My bad, brother. Peace and blessings to you. So, cheers. So it's a matter of recognizing where we are at this moment, and the nature of progression, the nature of, we can call it evolution, we can call it growth, we can call it simple progress and continuation. So that is it, and that is us, and that's where things are. There's one other thing. I'll pause for a moment. Greetings, sister. You funny. Now I'm recording just for your information. I'm recording right now, so I don't want to do anything implicationary. Nice to see you though. Peace and blessings. You funny still. All right. So, talking about the example of His Majesty Haile Selassie I, to like dutifully study and emulate, practice the teachings of sovereignty, but at the same time to recognize that there is the conventional sovereignty, and then there is the spiritual sovereignty, that is both the earthly and the heavenly, and that is different than simply the conventional sovereignty. Peace and blessings, brother. Thank you. So within the awakening of Rastafari, to recognize that there is a further direction and further guidance. And we can look at simply, when we look in this thread of our teachings, the example of Jesus. Jesus wasn't a king. Jesus didn't wear soft raiment. And additionally, so within Rastafari, for the brethren, them that believe in the resurrection and continuation of that guidance, there is that. So, and for those who abstain from emphasizing that experience of His Majesty Haile Selassie I, or within the teachings of Rastafari, just look at the other examples of prophets, and additionally within through the ages, and the nature of that. It's one that is distinct from kings, so, and queens. So I was recognizing that. Yeah, I'm not gonna venture to like get into all the nuances of the things to share, because that's where this is going at this point. There's some very beneficial insights, but then there's also responsibilities, and the battery is draining. We talk about caste. To be honest, I'm actually looking at. Fine, I'll do this very briefly. To be honest, what actually occurs is that I just finished the weekly consideration for this week, and there are a lot of things that are like a lot of message, guidance, wisdom, that is forwarded through the teachings this week, just specifically this week. It's every week, but this week particularly. So I'm just going to go through like a fast forward of the different readings from this week's portion. It's 36. We're in the weekly thing. Talked about the weekly reasoning within Rastafari. We're actually beginning our study open. Well, actually, I'm not gonna announce that here. I'll say we are doing some studies. We're making that available for kinfolk who have an interest. But it's actually, to be honest, it's for a select few. I'm not even like not. The intention is not to make it this an open invitation, but I've already let the air out of the bag. So I'm just going to say, for those that have an interest in studying, we're organizing something at this moment. So that being said, I will emphasize that we are guiding kinfolk who have an interest in studying. We're doing a program. We're cultivating a program specifically for brethren and sistren. For young brethren, particularly athletes. It's a world lit study program, and then also for sistren, particularly involving dance, traditional world dance. It's a world lit study program as well. So I'll direct people's attention to that, and for further consideration and information. So the readings this week, I'm just not even going to list it what it is. I'm just going to make reference to the general scripture it comes from, and then like a thought of guidance that comes from it. So from Torah this week, there's the episode where Miriam and Aaron, the siblings of Moshe Rabbeinu, basically speak bad about him, particularly because he marries a woman of African ancestry, a Cushite woman who is of dark complexion and very different from the rest of the children of Israel. And so they speak bad of her and of Moshe Rabbeinu, the person who just leads the children of Israel out of bondage, out of slavery. So then in response, God says, why were you not afraid to talk about my servant? Like other people speak to me, I speak to other people through veils of dreams and otherwise. However, I speak to Moshe Rabbeinu directly. I shouldn't say that in that respect on the first person, but Elohim speaks to Moshe Rabbeinu directly. So why were Miriam and Aaron not afraid to speak ill of him? Describes Moshe Rabbeinu as being the most humble of the people. So because of that, Miriam is afflicted with leprosy. And so if they didn't like the black skin, the brown black skin of Moshe Rabbeinu's wife, boom, okay, you like white so much, here's white, leprosy. And anyways, it's one of the few explicit examples of colorism and racism within the Torah. And that's not shade, that's just facts. And it still plays out significantly today, but through other means and through other mechanisms. The point for this that I'm sharing is that this actually signals the whole Torah, the Hebrew kinfolk signal it's beyond a civilizational, it's an existential shift from the paradigm of black dominance to a paradigm of white dominance. And for the sake of being very brief, that's what I'm gonna describe it as. But that is signified through the very narrative of Torah, through the existence of Hebrews, and additionally, because before that, what we can recognize is that the dominant paradigm of civilization is an Afrocentric paradigm. And we can look at just again the narrative of creation, the migration from the garden, the authorities that cultivate through the generations during that period, and that being kinfolk who have increasing darker melanated skin, a phenotype, and then amidst the migration, amidst the knowledge, amidst the branching out, there is a lightening of the skin, and then there amidst that progression, there is the emergence and the narrative, the temporal narrative and emergence of the Hebrew people, who are considered as lighter skinned, generally speaking. It's actually not the lightest, because it's obviously gets whiter. We have the whole Aryan race experience, but it's less than with the dark complected populations before that, and it signals a paradigm shift of dominance, of temporal dominance in terms of civilization. From the garden experience to that of civilization, or even quote unquote the Babylon experience. So, and that continues through this day. There's further shift, because now, I mean, that shift goes even further from like the middle ground, Middle East dominance to the northern dominance, the European dominance experience and perceptions, and that is shifting to an Eastern dominance and further. So, anyways, that's something that's signaled here. The second joint from the Upanishads is talking about the seed, and how, looking at a fruit, looking inside the fruit, you see the seed. You see that this huge tree that produces the fruit is created just from that small seed, and then in breaking the seed, the son sees that there's nothingness, or perceives that there's nothingness, and the Father explains that within that nothingness still exists the semblance and the existence of the tree, the eventuality of the tree. So that's a very, 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 very brief synopsis of the teaching. Then the Bhagavad Gita, we have a revisiting of the Varnas. Hi. We have a revisiting of the Varnas, and the notion of duty, that there's the Brahmas, the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and the Shudras, and that each one has a specific duty, and that each one is to be devoted to one's own duty, and it's through that devotion that one attains perfection, enlightenment, liberation. It's through fulfilling that purpose that exists within that duty. So the Brahmins are the priests, and it was interesting is that there's less of a matter of like actions attributed to the duties of the Brahmin. It's actually further qualities of being. For the Kshatriyas, the Brahmins being the priests. For the Kshatriyas, it's the kingly warrior caste. So it is qualities of character, but at the same time it's protection and additionally. And then when it gets to the Vaishyas, then it becomes cattle rearing and trade and like the tangible earthly endeavors, and then Shudra is just described very briefly as providing service, basically being the servants of others. Um, so when we look at this from an alien perspective about civilization, we recognize that each of these components are necessary within a collective. And there's obviously within the temporal experience of the Indian continent or Indian subcontinent, there is a very severe colorism as well, where the dark-skinned kinfolk are restricted to the physical labor, and the light-skinned kinfolk are attributed with the further luxuries of society. And there being a certain pragmatism with this. When people are in the field, people get darker skin. And so that's an easier way to maintain distinctions than otherwise. And there are strict, severe apartheid distinctions and separateness between the different Shudras, between the different Varnas. Now, all that being, and each one is necessary to keep the order going. So there's legitimacy within that accordingly. Now, but at the same time, there's also obviously fallacies, and it's a microcosm. It's a myopic recognition of existence and societal existence. And when people have ambitions that go beyond one's own lane of people, it unsettles, it undergirds, or it ungirds the foundations of that order and of that society, of the civilization. However, when the lines and those borders become excessively rigid, that also undergirds and unsettles the civilization, which also calls to mind a joint for the day, which is power has one of two destinies, either splintering or dwindling. So when we look at this is huge side note. This is like a hyper speed side note. But power, just the phenomena, has the destiny, one of two destinies: splintering or dwindling. So when we apply that particularly towards like the experience of civilization and empires and stuff like that, either and looking at the power and might of the United States, or the perceived the veil of the United States, hundreds of millions of people, advanced technology, huge weaponry, and all this other type of stuff. So if somebody gains the favor and agreement from that entity, oh, it's very powerful. It's very powerful. And if someone that gains the admonishment or hostility, oh, it's very, very dubious. But when one looks at like the nature of harnessing that power of government, the power of society, technology, science, and additionally, it's a very unwieldy prospect, because it goes in one of two ways. Either it dwindles, meaning that it just like starts to fizzle out, and it becomes less and less and less, just because it's very it's unsustainable, or it splinters. It grows and grows and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and in getting bigger and bigger and bigger, it's less manageable by any one being, or even by any one group of beings, and so as it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, it splinters. That's the nature of power. The nature of energy constantly flows. That's the nature of energy. It constantly flows. And then the nature of force is very short term. Like it's very proximate. Force is the application of power in a general sense, and so it's unsustainable. It's short. It's comparatively abbreviated. So that is the side note. It also brings to mind another side note, and looking at an image of a tree, recognizing that each of us are plants in many respects. Each of us emerge from plants. Each of us are sustained from plants. Each of us has the nature of plants, and recognizing that the plants flow downwards and upwards. There's the roots that flow like rivers down into the depths of the soil, and there are the branches that flow upwards, down up into the atmosphere of the sky. And so we can look at that flow as rivers, the roots flowing out like rivers, the branches flowing out like rivers. And considering, like in that respect, in that metaphor, in that blending of nature, in that awakening of nature, what is being put out? What are the roots putting out? What are those rivers of the roots going out into the soil? What are the rivers of the branches that go out into the atmosphere? And for each of us to recognize that within ourselves, what are the things that we're putting out there from our rivers into this sphere, into this realm of being? What are we putting out here? Both upwards and downwards. And just to be mindful, our feet are not the roots. Those are not the roots. The roots is the tailbone. How about that? That's the root chakra. You got that now. So that's our roots. So what are the rivers that flow from that roots? Check your spinal cord. With blessed love and peace. With blessed love and peace, healthy well-being, nurturing, care, and strength. All of us. So, anyways, that's another hyperspeed side note. Going back to, let's see if I can remember what we were talking about a second ago. Talking about civilization. Talking about the Varnas. So everybody has their duty. Now, even the Varna system of Desi land is a microcosm. And because it's a microcosm, there's a myopic. The endeavor of the universal application of that is myopic. So that when an outsider comes in who's lighter than everybody else, like the Aryan race, it befuddles and undermines the foundations of the Varna system, even when it's completely intact, because there's an outside entity that is undoing the authority, the false authorities, particularly within the Varna system. And that's a big charge, false authority, but again, I'm being comparatively abbreviated here, so but there's willingness to reason about that respectfully, mutually respectfully. Point here, let's expedite to the point, because we got things. Point here is that, as I said before, there is benefit, there is pragmatism within the Varnas, within the distinction. But at the same time, what the teachings, what the Vedas teach, particularly the Upanishads, what the Bhagavad Gita teaches, is that there is a way of being that transcends the Varna system as well, even transcends the gunas that essentially lightweight, discussably precipitate the Varnas. However, the point is that there's something that transcends, and recognizing that's what we're talking about when we talk about is it Samkhya? So the oneness, but it's very difficult for the finite being to progress in that spiritual awakening, because it involves release, it involves emptiness, equanimity, unattachedness. So, but it exists. So if we recognize, or when we recognize that it exists, and we recognize that the earthly exists, then we also have the propensity and susceptibility, the inclination of recognizing that there's an intermediary realm that exists between Samkhya and Yogahe. There is a distinct realm of Varna that includes each of those elements, that recognizes the equal holiness within each of these, whether it's praying and meditating, whether it's planting corn and grain and seed, and otherwise. And so all the duties of the Varna exist within an individual, and each individual within a collective having legitimacy in doing each of those Varnas without it being devalued higher or lower, or there being the application of the guilts and presumptions of karma and otherwise. So that the agrarian works next to, eats next to, and marries into the priest and the teacher and the doctor and the sovereign, and additionally. And so within the experience of the garden, each being's duty is recognized as holy. And there's that. Now that might seem like a spacey, spiritual, hippie kind of thing. It's what people are yearning for, even as we speak. Yet even further, what we can recognize is that the Varna system itself, only has relevance within the experience of civilization, within the experience of Babylon itself. Outside of Babylon, the Varna system is irrelevant. There's not the king and the priest and everything. There is not that separation. It's collective experience of the barbarians or the wilderness and the garden. So it's, that right there is beneficial to recognize. There's a context, there's a finiteness to the application and the relevance of the Varna system. Yes, it continues to exist for thousands of years and can be expected and supported for existing for thousands of years further. However, at the same time, there is a limitation to it as well. And so it abstains from encapsulating the universal. And because of that, there is an existence, even an earthly existence, that is legitimate and beneficial and pragmatic, that can be perceived as existing outside of the Varna system, or as existing as an amalgamation of the Varna system. As I just said, a collective of beings, clans, that share in each of these roles, each of these responsibilities, from cleaning the latrines to offering, making puja and officiating rites of passage and further. So obviously there's methodologies of cleanliness, and additionally there's knowledge that is gleaned from other traditions and walks about maintaining these balances. The Torah provides a lot of guidance in that respect, even though ironically and interestingly enough, much of those practices are not done at the moment amongst the children of Israel in an official public way. I'm talking about Korban and similar things without the construction of the temple, even though these things exist before the construction of the temple. So it's progress, just like Rastafari is in the nascent stage of growing, and to be honest, very much after thousands of years of walking these roads of creation, the children of Israel are also in a very early stage of regrowing and getting reacclimated as well. So it's a continual trot. There's other things too. There's no notes, obviously. Yeah, I'm supposed to be reading these. I'll finish reading these joints. So anyways, that was a response to the Bhagavad Gita. Continuing on to Tao Te Ching. I just for seriously, like, Lao Tzu is probably the furthest teacher, where it's just like all you have to do is like just say what he says and let that speak for itself, and let that marinate. So I'm just gonna do that. So I'm not gonna say what chapters. I'm just gonna quote it. So the first one chapter is knowing contentment avoids disgrace, knowing when to stop avoids danger. Thus one can endure indefinitely. The other quote is this: movement overcomes cold, stillness overcomes heat. Clear quietness is the standard of the world. Meng Tzu, going on to the next scripture, Meng Tzu talks about a man having a wife and a concubine. So the whole theme of these passages is focusing on the experience of the green of man and woman, meaning like the bond of a husband and wife, but also new life that is generated from the union of the two flesh into one. So that's the theme for all of these passages. Somehow or another, finding a teaching, a passage that speaks in some way, either directly, explicitly, or subtly, inherently, concerning that experience of the green of man and woman. So here we have the explicit articulation of the relationship of a man and his wife and concubine. So basically, he has two wives that he's living with, but he's fronting. He's going out, and he's like living as a pauper, a beggar in the streets, and eventually, and his wives are staying at home the whole time. And eventually, by the end of the day, he goes out to the outer banks, outer limits of the city where people are making offerings, and he begs for food. And so he begs for food and gets some wine, and he goes from person to person who are making offerings until he gets enough to eat. Then he comes home with a full belly and somewhat inebriated, looking nice, and then talks about all the nice people that he talked with, the honorable, wealthy people that he talks with. One of his wives one day follows him and sees what he actually does, and then comes back and tells her sister and spouse of her husband what the husband is actually doing, and then they both weep because they see that their lives are attached to his and what he's about and everything. So to be honest, what that provides is actually obviously the notion of being honest and being forthright in terms of taking care of one's responsibilities, a man taking care of his wife, and further providing in an honest way, and being honest with her in that relationship, but also recognizing that when a woman does marry a man, that she is attaching her well-being, she's staking her life in his prospects. So if he's fronting and don't have the prospects that he says or feigns to have, like, that's what else. She's like, she's stuck with that. So now in today's age, that's the other thing too, this whole notion of independence and how people are, that's what it is. Okay, so anyways, that's part of the consideration from this joint, is like a man being irresponsible, and how a woman stakes her life for life on the strength of her husband. So being mindful of how she does that and to whom she does that. I was about to say, like, today there's the notion of divorce and separation and all these things about rights and stuff like that. I don't mean to sound condescending to that. How many times I'm going to say that? As many as necessary to speak truth as well, but also to speak things that are contrary to the sensibilities and sensitivities of the feigned political correctness of imperialism today. Now, that being said, the notions of divorce and rights of women, in additionally in that respect. First of all, obviously, yes, men are to take care of women, and not to abuse women, not to take advantage of women, and additionally to be dutiful. And this is these protocols are included within the Quran. These are included within the Torah explicitly. We can look at the Upanishads, we can look at the Bhagavad Gita, we can look at Tao Te Ching, and other texts to see how these teachings are provided in an inherent way, just a matter of having respect to all beings and understanding what the nature of the commitment that a woman makes to a man in marriage, and thus him making a reciprocal commitment and providing continually in marriage as well. So that's historic. That's for thousands of years. So the notions of divorce and individual rights and additionally today are actually not further protections of women. They actually are conducive towards further deterioration of the nature of marriage itself, and then giving women a further advantage in that deterioration. But in the meanwhile, like, children are devastated in that process. Society is devastated. Like, look what Arjuna says in chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita about the corruption of society from the corruption of the women. So, and the corruption of the women emerging from the lack of faith in the actions of the man and lack of support on the actions of the man. So, it's a mutual thing. It's not on either men or women, but to recognize that the empowerment, the whole notion of empowerment, that's pimp talk. There is no such thing as empowerment. It's just further favorable enslavement. Because if you're relying on something else for empowerment, guess what? That's enslavement. So, anyways, the whole notion of divorce and rights and alimony and all this other stuff, it's just mechanisms for deteriorating the institution of marriage. And the point for saying that, I'm going on and on and on right now, and I need to be going on and on and on right now. It's talking about the experience of, I'm just going to go with like the rote thing at the moment just to help memory. I'm going to talk about a healthy relationship. Now, there's a point I'm getting to with this. Okay. So, we're talking about the deterioration of marriage, the corruption and the effects that it has on children, as well as on the aggregate of society, the norms, the pervasiveness of adultery, and how divorce is just a pretext for people for men with greater amounts of money to be further abusive and exploitational towards women, as long as men have the ability to pay for it. So it's not actually any further guarantees towards women, even when women are provided monetary compensation and protections. And additionally, that's not full protection. It's not emotional protection. It's not an emotional support, and otherwise. And in that financial windfall or whatever can be taken away through taxation and unemployment and all these other different things of predatoriness within society. So the money isn't security. So the notion of freedom through money is, again, whose money is that? Who's issuing the money? It's pimp talking. It's a slave game. So that, I say again, it's facts. So that being said, what is recognized. When reading, I'm reading at the moment part of the narrative of Avraham Avinu and his experience before entering Canaan and then since entering Canaan. And the big thing is idolatry. Like everybody around him is worshiping idols, these statues, and additionally praying to the statues. And so this is, obviously, this is some part of the practice within India at this very moment. And my point here is, other than to vilify that, we are in our path. We are prohibited from doing it, strictly, vehemently, unquestionably prohibited from doing that, and we do abstain from doing that. We abstain from worshiping images and idols. And similarly, we abstain from referencing God in a first person or a third person masculine form, and doing other things that within Abrahamic traditions and Abrahamic faiths from Judaism, Islam, and Christianity can be seen and recognized as graven images. So particularly in a cognitive sense, the whole ego and the man's ego of presuming that role of God right there, without constructing any statues, but just offering oneself as that veil. So that's justice, and that's actually where I'm getting to with this. So when we look at the narrative of Avraham Avinu, we just see that it's pervasive, and people are doing just very irrational, delusional type of things with that normalcy, or with that normalcy of distraction. So that's what Avraham Avinu speaks to significantly, is sobering people from that distraction to focus on the true reality, Brahman, that exists beyond the statues. And additionally, now when we look today, at least within Western civilization, that's significantly influenced by Torah and Bible and Quran, even though many people are actually secular, but still very significantly influenced. The days are counted based upon the Gregorian calendar. So a lot of the presumptions and shibboleth is still very much from the Judeo-Christian experience, blended with the Greco-Roman politics. That being said, so in that experience today, like the whole notion of idol worship, it's like it's not a norm at the moment. Again, it does happen other places around the world, but it's not a norm within Western civilization. So what could be seen as the idols of today? We can talk about celebrities and all those other type of things, but here it is. This is plain and simple what the actuality is. The idols of today is the individual. It's in the democracy and in the hyper democracy and republic. It's the rhetoric of the empowerment of the individual, the freedom of the individual, the priority of the individual. Now each individual becomes the graven image, the idol of worship. Each individual worships each individual's own self. The things that people do are attributed to the well-being of the individual, meaning that it's an individual's will. I have the right to do this. It's my will to do that. I'm just going to express myself. I. Individualism. That's the idol of today. And in the individualism, it's a matter of whatever the individual feels like doing or wants to do, has the pleasure of doing. Oftentimes sex, drugs, rock and roll. Now the protocols of it involve some feigned avoidance of inhibiting other individuals' abilities of being other individuals' selves. But eventually that just becomes a matter of empowered individuals against other empowered individuals. But ultimately, again, it's just a matter of recognizing that that's the idolatry of today, is the individual. And so one of the large manifestations and symptoms of this is the adultery that everyone, I won't say everyone, that the vast collective of kinfolk, including myself, are enveloped within. That goes from like actual fornication to cultures of pedophilia, cultures of pornography, cultures of sexual exploitation, and additionally how it's so rife, just like with amongst Avraham Avinu at that era, dealing with the pervasiveness of idolatry. At this moment, it's the pervasiveness of individualism, and prominently with the experience of adultery. The normalcy of that, the corruption of that, the fears and the hatreds and the delusions that result from that behavior, and how to facilitate the healing in a congenial way. The difference being that, unlike the times of Avraham Avinu, there is a potentate. I should say this. In the times of Avraham Avinu, there is a potentate. There's a number one charge. It starts with an M. Babylon. I'm reading it right now. It's past this part of it, but Nimrod. Okay, so Nimrod is the number one guy, like Pharaoh and otherwise. In the narrative of Torah, there are many pharaohs before that righteous and further, but this particular Pharaoh in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, corrupt. But in each of those situations, that's the number one guy. Now, it's possible in that scenario to recognize that's the number one guy. That's the one who has the vendetta and everything else like that. Meanwhile, the subjects who are walking around are subjects. They're not the number one. They don't have the vendetta, so they're increasingly inclined and accessible, or accessible is the wrong word. Increasingly inclined and proximate with having an honest conversation and sobering up and be like, yeah, this is kind of trippy. Let's do better. That was during the times of Avraham Avinu. During these times, at this moment, in the advent and the experience of the phenomena of the citizen and democracy, each citizen is Pharaoh, meaning that when people have the conversations with a citizen, the citizen has at some point has that trigger that kicks in of propping up and continuing the system and the authority, assuming that authority, and being offended by the prospect or the suggestion of existing outside of the system or otherwise. So it's like arguing directly against Pharaoh or directly against Nimrod, both of blessed memory. So that's the challenge today when having these conversations. And again, each kinfolk, each being is struggling. Each being is struggling between the sovereignty and the enslavement, citizenship. So, and it's not with the derogatoriness. It's that this is said. It's with the imploring of compassion and empathy and effective communication, and a tempering. That's the word, tempering of expectation, and then a tempering of yearning. Within each interaction, within each conversation, rather than trying to convert somebody or convincing somebody to leave the plantation, to leave society, or otherwise, it's a matter of just saying, what can we share at this moment? What is the person authorized to talk about? What is the person authorized to do? The person can be authorized to leave society, because that's part of what is written within the code of the United States, the U.S. Constitution. So there is that availability, but it's a very involved process. So it's not just something to be presumed and given, because otherwise it could be perceived as being hostile, underseating or unseating the systemic order. So it's just a matter of recognizing that. So each thing, making oneself available to the conversation and to the guidance and support, and proceeding accordingly. So that's one of the joints from this. So we'll finish up here, God willing. So I was just at Mengtse, so now we're going into the Digha Nikaya of the Buddha. It basically just recounts the 8 Noble Eightfold Path, which is actually very beneficial because it's just basically a synopsis of the teachings that the Buddha provides. Right belief, right aspiration, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right thought, and right meditation. So the right, that's just one, that's one articulation of it. The articulation here is described as right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right endeavor, right mindfulness, right concentration. Again, this is very beneficial, particularly when I'm reading this for the 100th time or thereabouts. I see something new, but also something very obvious and something very beneficial and pragmatically helpful in processing, particularly the Noble Eightfold Path. So just to summarize this very briefly, after an hour, is this. The first one, right view, is basically just recognizing the Noble Fourfold Truth. So that's pretty much like the simple mathematics of that. Right, in life there's suffering, and suffering there's in life there's suffering. Suffering is caused by attachment. There is a transcendence beyond suffering, and that transcendence beyond suffering is experienced through the Eightfold Path. So those are the Four Noble Truths, the Fourfold Noble Truth. So that's the first. That's right view, as is articulated here. Again, I've read this probably over 100 times, at least over 20 times, because I've read it once every year. and then in doing studies in additionally, probably over 50. That's probably the closer number, probably over 50 times. So just because a person reads something 50 times doesn't mean, like the Dhammapada says, it doesn't mean they absorb it. So it's allowed to absorb. So anyways, here we go, continuing on. Right view is just what I said, the Knowable Fourfold Truth. Right thought. Actually, all right, so yeah, right thought. So basically what the Buddha is describing here is basically referencing greed, hatred, delusion, and then saying right thought is the contraries to that. So instead of greed, hatred, and delusion, it's what's referred to as the renunciant life, but actually can be also looked at as in terms of generosity, benevolent will, metta, and then looking at the notes, ahimsa, nonviolence, peacefulness. So that's what right thought is. Instead of greed, hatred, delusion, it is honesty, compassion, and modesty. So then we go into the third one, which is right speech. So basically, it's abstaining from communicating in a way that is commensurate with the Panchasilas. It's not exactly the way it's written here. It's not exactly synonymous with the Panchasilas, but it's basically and it's actually, it mirrors the next one, which is right action, and that's what provides this further evidence, because in the right action it does reference the Panchasilas, even though it's only 4. Refraining from killing living beings, refraining from taking what's not been given, refraining from sexual misconduct, and refraining from actually, wait a minute. Okay, so it's actually 3 that are listed as right action. The 4th one, I guess, is not speaking falsely, which is included within the right speech. The 5th one that's excluded from both of these is abstinence from intoxication, which can be understood as delusion, but false speech, malicious speech, rough speech, and frivolous talk. Those are what's described in right speech. False speech is falsehood. Malicious speech can be understood as violent speech. Rough speech can be understood as stingy or thieving speech, just being disrespectful without necessarily being malicious. And then frivolous speech can be understood as the adulterous speech, like wasting oneself, just talking about nothingness. And then again, that 5th element of intoxication being excluded from both at the moment, at least in this articulation. So again, this particularly for the sake of remembering these joints. So now we get to the 5th joint, right livelihood. So this is actually described in many of the suttas. There's a long list of things that a bhikshu abstains from doing in terms to support himself. Huge list of the next realms of morality and right livelihood. So that's basically just very generally referenced here. Then the 6th joint is right endeavor. So this is somewhat, I'm getting way detailed into these joints, and that's not the intention here. I've already started, so I'll finish up. And this is a foundational teaching within Buddhism, so that's one of the reasons why I invest here. So this the 6th joint of right endeavor. Right. So okay, this is beneficial. So first, what the right endeavor involves. First, it's a matter of having the inclination, having the thought. From the thought, like generating motivation, like getting oneself psyched up for doing it, and then in getting oneself psyched up for that, then devoting man's mind, or devoting a person's mind towards actualizing, and then once devoting one's mind, then doing it. Not talking a lot about doing it, but just having an idea, hyping oneself, I won't say hyping, but motivating oneself to do it. Then in doing it, like being disciplined in doing it, being determined and concentrating in doing it, and then actually doing it. So in that process, what is actually being done here, talked about, and guided here, is to identify things that are harmful, that somebody hasn't started doing to let that to keep that away from happening. So recognizing things that are harmful, if somebody's not already doing it, to keep away, to continue to stay away from doing it. And then for things, the second category is things that are harmful that one observes and one doing, to find a way of stop doing it, to just stop doing that. Then the things that are healthy, that are helpful, how to start doing those things that are healthy. And then for those that haven't been already done, that one isn't already doing. And then for the things that are healthy that one is already doing, to continue doing it steadily, thoroughly, perpetually. So that's the right endeavor here. So it's a matter of motivating the mind, getting the energy, devoting the mind, concentrating on it, and getting it done. And so it's for peace and blessings to you. That's for keeping negative things away, negative things that are already here, letting that go as much as possible, keeping distant. And then for the positive things, for those positive things that are absent at the moment, initiating that. And then for the positive things that are already being done and experienced, optimizing and continuing that. So that's right endeavor. So then we get to the seventh joint. We're near the end of this sequence. The seventh joint is right mindfulness. So this is I'm trying to think of what's being referenced here in terms of like the traditional teaching from the Buddha in the seventh joint. It's less evident at the moment. So it's just a matter of cultivating mindfulness, metta, body, mind, spirit, heart, we can say, similar to the Beatitudes that Jesus provides. And then, but it's a matter of cultivating that within oneself, removing the hatred and the pain that one experiences, and actually that's what it is. Cultivating basically peacefulness, calmness, empathy within one's own self, body, mind, heart, and spirit, and then seeing cultivating that in a universal experience. And so that gets into the conclusion of this joint, which is right concentration, and that's actually a description of the ascension through the four jhanas, the four states of happiness. And there's a detailed sequence on that, but I'm not going to get into the detailed sequence in that right at the moment. Peace and blessings, bro. So that's that. Then in the Dhammapada, there's a description. Some are born in the womb, some are born in hell. Some the devout go to heaven. The stainless continue to nibbana. So it also describes how there's no place to hide in terms of karma, in terms of the bad deeds that we do, and there's no hiding from death either. So it's going to happen. So the consideration here, particularly, is the notion of hell, and there's a difference between being a resident within hell and being a citizen of hell. What am I doing right there? See that? Serious. So being a resident is just recognizing the happenstance and doing the best with what can to emerge from that. Being a citizen within hell is a matter of like being proactive and committed towards that experience. So when we find ourselves on a pirate ship, we have a similar decision, and that's not as shade. It's not shady, passive aggressive type stuff. That's the other thing also. I've just said it already at the beginning of this joint, so I'm not hiding from that. Now that being said, what is another side note here that it seems beneficial to share is that the nature of oppression, the nature of imperialism, is actually passive aggressive. What? Yes, it's passive aggressive. The nature of imperialism, the nature of warfare is very, very heinous and proactive, and imperialism is a part of that. But the ongoing experience of imperialism, particularly the day-to-day downpression of imperialism, is passive aggressive, and it continually tests people, brethren and sistren, to react. And that's the kicker. When people react to it in an imprudent way, that's when the imperialism has the excuse of laying down the hammer. When people respond to the provocations, the tests, in a prudent way, that's what paralyzes imperialism. So it's not an excuse. It's not a sanctioning of imperialism, but for those who have the inclination of resistance, of transcendence beyond the imperialism, recognizing that imperialism itself is a passive aggressive phenomena. Little pokes, little provocations, and yes, it's all types of nasty, but at the same time we have to be mindful of how we respond to that, because that the response is what triggers the hammer. So we have to be mindful of that, and particularly amidst a global imperialism, even when we talk about warfare, and additionally, that hammer is applied to in a collective sense. So when we attach ourselves to kinfolk who are not disciplined, who are responding to the provocations in an unfavorable way, and the hammer gets applied, that's part of at this point there is no foreign warfare. It's all one collective, it's all one collusive system of oppression and down-oppression. So again, it's continual provocation and prodding, but we have to be mindful of how we individually respond to those, and then how we attach ourselves to others, and how those others respond to it as well. Because even when it's not ourselves personally that are doing it, but others respond to that provocation in an imprudent way, and the hammer is applied, the hammer can be applied in a comprehensive way, saying that, oh, it's all people together, it's the whole collective. So we have to be very, very mindful of how we do our allegiances and allyship accordingly, because a lot of kinfolk don't have discipline, so we got to be mindful of that. So anyways, that's that. Now we'll go to the Gospels. This is from John, and Jesus goes to the well and talks to the woman from Samaria, who tells her all the things about her. So just the notion of Jesus going to the well and asking for some water to drink. Well, what does he need to drink for? What's he looking for with that drink? Is that code speak for being thirsty, or not? With all that, don't mean no disrespect by that, but just that's actuality. That's the actual consideration. Is he actually in thirst of water? Because whenever was he hungry for anything, or whenever was he thirsty for anything before that, until the crucifixion? Now, I'm spitballing this at the moment. I'm thinking about this just extemporaneously at the moment. But seriously, like, why is he asking anyone for anything? And his disciples say that when approaching him, like, why is he talking to a woman? What's going on? So, anyways, for consideration, relationship that Jesus has with women, Mary Magdalene and otherwise. The Quran. Very beneficial connection concerning the garden, creation, relationship, man, woman, guidance, purpose within life, balance, prayers, meditation, giving charity, being generous, sharing as it is shared. That's another thing too. We have to give. We have to give. Those are some words that I cultivate within recent experience. So we have to give, and that's what I'm going to submit in terms of the summation from the segments from the Quran. Then we have a teaching from the Tattvarta Sutta from Jain tradition. We're going to just talk about telepathy and leave it at that. So with that being said, we got the low battery warning a while ago, so we're going to wrap this up. We give all thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim. Blessed love and peace in Rastafari.